Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to our March Welcoming Table Talk for the Christian Alliance for Inclusive Development. We do this once a month, the third Thursday of every month, and we try to hit a time zone that catches lots of folks to be able to participate either in their mornings before work or in the start of their workday or at the end of their workday and into their evenings. So today we're excited. We've got Temwa Wright and Giftie who are going to be sharing about their local organizations in Malawi and Nigeria. And yeah, we've got some great questions and conversation on how local organizations and international NGOs can actually be better community members to one another and what that looks like. And we don't often get to hear the voices of colleagues who are running local organizations and what citizenship and good neighbor looks like and feels like to them. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. What we do in the flow of this is we start with our intro now, and we're going to break then for about 15 minutes into some networking time in small groups so that people get a chance to find out who else is part of the network, what brought them to the Christian Alliance, etc. Then we come back from break and we'll do a more formal introduction of our two guests today and kick off what is usually about an hour of conversation with them about their organizations and these topics that we've laid out for you. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So when we move to that space, always remember that our chat box is open. And so you can be posting comments, you can be posting questions that come to mind, or if you want to save them up and just wait till the end when we open the floor to question and answer from our participants who are on the call today. And these sessions are recorded, so we will be sharing it across our YouTube channel. The Christian Alliance has its own YouTube channel as well as on the Bright platform, our community platform. So thank you again for everybody for coming today. We're excited for this conversation. And yeah, let's break into some time to get to know one another, and then we'll regroup. Okay, I hope everybody had a good time in their breakout rooms and getting to know one another a little bit better and what drew you to the Christian Alliance for Inclusive Development. So this morning, I'm super excited to share. We have Giftie, and she is the head of Girls Leading Africa and doing some great work in Nigeria that we're going to hear more in detail about. And we have Temwa Wright with us, and she is heading up Pamoza International in Malawi, which is a community development organization, works with women and men, girls and boys in the community. So we have an opportunity to hear from them, hear about the work that they're doing, and then we'll have some opportunity to delve more deeply into the questions around what does it mean to be good neighbors to each other and good citizens. So I think I'm going to kick it off with Giftie today to be able to share about her organization. And she's got, some comments and going to share all the highlights with us, and then we'll move to Temwa. Giftie, take it away.
Sure. Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. Depending on the side of the world that you have, it's still day or good evening. My name is Giftie, and I run Girls Leading Africa. Girls Leading Africa, to a large extent, reflects my personal experience growing up in Nigeria, in the southern part of Nigeria, and having parents who were educated or who are educated and believe in girls' education and just believing that every child has equal rights to improving the world and making the world a better place. So whether it's girls' education, like I have mentioned, or girls' empowerment, every time I share, I always look back at, I remember one post on Facebook that I made that my father is a feminist, and and my Christian friends, most of my Christian friends came to almost tear me down. Why would I say that? I said that to say that he was one person, my dad was one person who never saw gender as a barrier to you being whatever God has called you to do. So whether it's who has to wash the car, or who has to go to the market, or who has to cook the food, everybody, as long as you are part of that family and you are going to eat that food, you have to be involved. So many years after he passed, I got to realize what he actually was preparing me for, because our home actually did not reflect the realities in the communities with regards to value for education or value for the rights and life of the girl child, which was what stemmed or sparked my desire to found Girls Leading Africa. Even after working with several nonprofit organizations in Nigeria, I still observed that there was still that gap. And there is still that gap today, right? Who knows if it's a couple of many Girls Leading Africa coming together that would change that, or many individuals, just affirming and speaking up about the rights to education. So Girls Leading Africa as an organization seeks to empower and, of course, diminish the stereotypes surrounding girls, but also emphasizing that, being the lens that diminishes stereotypes, and also emphasizing that girls are a valuable part of the community. So whether it's through mentoring, returning to school, entrepreneurship training, and whatever other aspects of community development that girls and women are very critical to. As an organization, we are in the rural part of Nigeria, southern Nigeria, and we're able to set up a functional vocational training center that runs 5 days a week. We also ensure that the girls in our communities who are out of school can go back to school. And most of our programs are tailored towards teenage girls and young mothers who most times, or many of us here know that most times when girls get pregnant out of wedlock, it is almost a definition of this is the end of life for her, right? For Girls Leading Africa, we see that nobody has a right to end anybody's life or anybody's dreams, right? It could be a starting point to telling her story. It could be a starting point to living her true self. It could be a starting point to naming those challenges and picking up herself and running again. So mainly, that's what, the programs we do at Girls Leading Africa is. And those are some of the things we emphasize and ensure that, girls bring in their full selves and that their dreams are valid as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I've already got questions for you. And I've known more about your organization, and I still have questions. So I'm excited for our conversation. Temwa, how about you share a little bit about Pamoza?
Okay, awesome. Hi, everybody. So nice to see you wherever you are. So I'll start with this little introductory video. It's just a 2-minute video. Gives you an overview of Pamoza, where we're working, so you can see it for yourself, because, it's better than seeing me. You can't really tell where I work just by looking at me. So I think we're going to cue that up. And then after that, I'll be the next voice you hear. Pamoza means together in Tumbuka, which is a language spoken in northern Malawi. We really believe that it's God's desire for all people to have access to the resources that He has blessed us with in the world. Yet there are many people that are underprivileged, including the people in Malawi. Pamoza focuses on 5 main initiatives: education, healthcare, entrepreneurship, Christian outreach, and agriculture. We believe in working together with the people we serve and together with people like you to transform lives.
Manyowa wafetereza kavangiro kake na pindurapo na katiro kake nako na pinduraposo nyengo yose namuna karianga chakula changwa chakunisuza asuza kwene panyongo ya sono chakula na chikunisuza ngavirisha.
I managed to be selected to go to university. When I was there, my father started paying school fees, and it happened that he committed suicide. I was tempted to drop out of school, and then Pamoza started paying my school fees. Now I'm a graduate in agricultural engineering, and I thank God for Pamoza.
We started a school breakfast program. The kids were coming to school, they had nothing to eat. So we worked with the villages and the chiefs to identify land that the community members could farm. They grew their own food, they prepared their breakfast, and fed 1,600 kids every school day, and it's sustained by the community. There's actually an African proverb we often quote. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Our impact is only realized when we come together. That's the Pamoza approach.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So you heard the motto at the end. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So Pamoza means together. Pamoza means together. Our whole approach is to work together with community members, with the families we serve in rural Malawi to improve their quality of life. And we focus on 5 initiatives like you heard in the video, but the best way to remember this is an acronym, CHIEF, Chief, okay? Christian outreach, healthcare, income generation, education, and food security. It's a holistic approach, meeting the spiritual and the physical needs of people. You can't tackle one area without the other. I'm originally from Malawi. I've been in the US more than 30 years. So a lot of what you see is very Americanized Temwa, but Malawi is still my home. And my family started this organization because we really felt that we have been blessed with access to resources in the US, but the purpose of us being blessed is so that we can continue to bless other people. And Malawi is one of the 10 poorest countries in the world. More than 10% of the population has HIV/AIDS. More than 80% live in the rural areas and are subsistence farmers living off of the land. Very little access to healthcare and education, and a lot of things that we take for granted. So we deliberately work in the rural area. We're in the northern region that actually has the least number of NGOs in Malawi. There's more than 900 NGOs in Malawi, believe it or not. So it's because there's so many needs. So a lot of people are drawn to serving Malawi, but most people go to the central and the southern region. So there's 19 million people in Malawi. It's a small but densely populated country. Where we're working, where Pamoza's working, very underdeveloped, no running water, no electricity, everybody's walking, everybody lives off of the land. And I tell you, when I think about having to grow enough food to survive for the whole year, I don't even know how I would do it, because I garden, but mostly, you know, as a leisurely activity, right? I don't farm so that I can actually survive. So a lot of the needs that we are addressing are so that people can thrive. We really believe that families should have access to all the things we have access to: safe drinking water, food, you know, education for their children and themselves. We train the adults too on how to read and write. So we have a lot of programming that we're doing, but really focus on these 5 things: Chief, Christian outreach, healthcare, income generation, education, and food security. And I can go on and on and on, but I'll stop there because I get really excited about this work.
I love how passionate you both are and absolutely God has called you both to these ministries, and for very personal reasons. So Temwa, I'm going to give a little shout out to your father, who I know. Isn't the region where you started where your father grew up?
Yeah.
So her father is Dr. Mike Mtika. And if you studied international development at Eastern University, he's a professor of sociology, but he started, I think, the first 10 or 11 years of his career at World Vision. So he's got long roots into understanding the global NGO sector. And part of his inspiration of working with Temwa and creating this organization is to do it a different way. Because recognizing, you know, while we love the large NGOs and the international NGOs, it does need to be more localized and elevating, you know, the solutions that come from the community, you know. So yeah, I'm a big fan of your father.
Me too. Sometimes.
Well, that's good. And Giftie, I'm just so intrigued when I think of Nigeria, I do think of a highly patriarchal society. And again, I'm making huge generalizations, especially with the division of culture between North and South, Nigeria. But the fact that your father was such an advocate for, girls and boys, doesn't matter which, if you're going to eat tonight, you're going to be preparing the food, and, so not taking on the traditional role expectations. Where do you think he was influenced by that? Did he come from parents that, instilled that in him? I'm intrigued by this because we talk about it in the book that we wrote. How do men who've come to a very different cultural view of women, how did that happen? I've interviewed a number of men around the world to learn that.
I mean, Nigeria had a civil war in the 60s, in the late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And my father and his siblings lost their father, who was a school principal.
Okay.
And at a very early age, their mother, who was not educated, had to raise them.
Yeah.
So, and she struggled on every side. On every side you can always think of, that she made sure that her children, all of them, got education.
Mm.
So at some point, my father being her first child out of 7 kids, my father had to stop school to join his mother work and ensure that all of his other 6 siblings go to school, including the two girls in the family. So I to a large extent, I believe that it all stemmed from there. It all stemmed from there because his mother would have, like any other woman who wasn't educated, just ensure that her 2 female children get married like she got married without education. But she ensured that her, female children got an education, even if it had to be that her first child, who was a man, had to stop school to join her in selling or, make farming to ensure that his siblings go to school. So with that being said, I say that the family plays a huge role. The family plays a huge role, and the parent involved, because whether it was communicated or not communicated, my father saw the importance of educating all children equally. And just to wrap it all up, after his, younger siblings had gotten education to a certain extent where they could, secondary or high school education, as we know that time, was more like, the bachelor's degree that people have today. So many people could begin working after having a high school diploma and ensuring that they get college degrees after that. So after my uncles and aunties, got to a certain level of education, my grandmother moved the focus back to my father and ensured that he got all the education he needed, whether it was being on his neck and ensuring that he got that education. So to all of the extent you can think of, my grandmother played a huge role in instilling that, whether it was through communication or because the Bible was basically all of the things they grew up in. So I can almost imagine when my grandmother was alive, justice was everything to her, including who gets the least, amount of food or who gets the largest portion, because all of that, communicated to her how she raised her children and how she wanted her own children to raise their own children. So for example, if my grandmother comes home and sees either me or my brother at home, the first question is, why are they not in school today? This is a woman who did not get education. So his mother played a huge role in instilling that in him.
Yeah, nice. Well, and you both have got organizations that, so Temwa, your work is in northern Malawi. Are there a bunch of other organizations around you, local organizations, doing similar work? As you said, there's what, 900?
Yeah, more than 900 are doing work in Malawi. We have a lot of NGOs. In fact, one of the reasons I got involved in this is when I look back at my life in Malawi, the people I saw who were helping Malawi did not look like me. And it created this power differential where I felt like the helper looks this way, the helped looks like this, power looks that way, power looks like this. And I wanted to change that narrative. So going back, a lot of people would say, wow, thank you, daughter, for coming back. And when they see, oh, you have been able to not only improve your life through education and access and all this, but you're coming back and now you're helping. It makes it very possible for them because I am still Malawian rooted, right? I'm very much Malawian rooted. And my father, like you say, we started in a village that my father grew up. His nickname was Njalayawo, which means his hunger. He was one of those hungry kids just walking around. He looked so sad. And so they just called him, oh, his hunger, his hunger. And he was able, because of people investing in his life, able to go on to high school, able to go on to college, able to get his PhD, now teaching at Eastern University, retired, but still teaching and giving back. So one village we started in, now we're in 460 villages. Now where we're serving is not as populous in NGOs as the central and the southern region. And we have our area, there's traditional authority systems in Malawi. You have to work with the chiefs. There's usually one big head chief over other little chiefs. And, you know, we have an area of about 162,000 people with this one head chief over this area. And there's probably fewer than 3 NGOs in this area. But there are other bigger, the thing that makes us unique is we're headquartered in the village. So a lot of NGOs are headquartered in the urban areas and they do some work, drive in and do some work, but our staff live and work in the community. We are really, really connected to our work that way, which is very different from what other bigger NGOs do.
So did your organization and do other organizations need to go through the local chief, the 160 person over 160,000 to get permission to work in the area?
They should. I don't know if they do. We do it that way because you cannot affect change as sustainably without the engagement of the local chiefs. But how you engage them is really important. We believe in engaging them from a capacity building partnership perspective. Sometimes, unfortunately, Beth, like right now, there's a natural disaster that just hit Malawi. When money funnels in, it often goes to the top. It gets creamed off by government officials. It gets creamed off by chiefs and local elders. People get bought off little by little. And then by the time it really gets to the people that really need it, there's very little left because the way they're really engaging is mostly payoffs, like, you know, development. Not development.
Well, and that's the double-edged sword. There's organizations that have been kicked out of unwelcoming countries like India. And one of their lessons learned is they didn't make enough relational inroads to local systems like the chief system, the tribal system. They didn't make enough relationships for people to then stand up for them when they needed it. But the flip side of that is that it can become seen as you're a Western agency, you've got money, and so if you want to come and do work in our organization, in our community, we'll absolutely help you make it happen, but we expect some, remuneration for that. And so it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You want those relationships, but genuine relationships, not just yet another part of the system that you have to, pay to play, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Giftie, I'd be interested in where you're located with Girls Leading Africa. Is that also lots of other NGOs, local NGOs, INGOs where you're working?
Interestingly, no, because we are in the very remote part of southern Nigeria, which many times the big NGOs are usually in the cities and in the urban areas. And so where we are is, we are the only, if I'm permitted to use that word, we are the only nonprofit organization that has an office that functions every day in that community. Most of the organizations that work in the community have their presence and their offices outside of the community. So they come in to do a one-off thing and then go out back again. But we are the only organization that have an office present in the community and that, you know, people see every day and runs 24 hours, you know, a day in the community as well.
Yeah. So that's a good segue to my next question. When you think about, you know, you both mentioned other organizations that come into the community for a day and do some, you know, event or something. What do you think are the qualities that make for good collaboration between, you know, good neighbors, so to speak, between these types of organizations, these different types of organizations?
I'll let Giftie take that one first, and then I'll add to it.
Sure. When I think of who a good neighbor is, I have 1,001 things running through my mind. And it's important to have this conversation because at the end of the day, I believe that the goal of the smaller organizations or the local nonprofit organizations and the bigger nonprofit organizations or the international nonprofit organizations is to create a better world for everybody, right? Anything outside of that, then we are probably in the wrong business. So when I think of good neighbors, the first I think is being friendly in the actual sense of being friends, right? When we are involved with friends or when we have friends, the first thing is not to exploit our friends, but to have, you know, a healthy relationship with our friends. And then the second I would mention is being helpful, right? Being helpful. A good neighbor watches out for other neighbors. Is there somebody that is looking sneaky around there at the front of your door that I need to, you know, call your attention to? Or how do I support my neighbor, right? So with that, I mean, I would talk around how do the larger organizations, international organizations, help the local organizations, especially knowing that the local organizations would be in existence in that particular community longer than they would. So I'll be looking at strengthening capacity. I'll be looking at improving the lives, you know, of members of the community. I always tell, you know, my team members that if we are here in this community in the next 20 years, then we've not done anything. Because in the next 20 years, I want to be kicked out of business, right? I don't want to be working, you know, doing the same thing and crying about the same thing or nagging about the same thing we have been doing in the last, you know, 5 years or so. So being helpful, being respectful is very important. Like, I mean, the Bible says when you go into a community, you should do what? Acknowledge the people in the community. So like Temwa has said, what are the things that I need to do as the bigger brother to ensure that, you know, I am also part of this community? Are the cultures that I have to respect? Are the entry processes I should follow through? Are the people that I need to acknowledge? Which organizations are already existing there that I can have conversations with to basically understand? Because the idea is not to create an impression or, you know, create a standard that the smaller organizations will not be able to meet after you've gone. There's an African proverb that says one finger alone cannot wash the face, right? It takes everybody's collective responsibility to wash the face and make sure that the face is clean. So in being good neighbors, I think that's another thing that is, you know, at the back of my mind. We are all, you know, fingers from the same hand, right? And it takes all of us to do it. So if it takes all of us to do it, what are the processes that are too cumbersome, right? For the larger organizations in the urban areas, it's not a problem, but for the ones in the local communities, for example, most of the people I work with, because it's a very rural community, once you talk about banking, everybody's looking at you like, so you want to take our money to, you know? So people have local ways of saving.
Yeah.
And so if you want to engage a local vendor and you're asking a local vendor to give you a receipt, to give you a this, to give you a that, that means you're not even ready to even do the work. So how do we stay present in the actual sense of being present to understand what makes this community different from the community I am in, right? And how can I make working with them quite easy instead of putting so much pressure, and then after a year or two leaves and people are asking, so, right? So yeah, those are some of the things I look out for when I think of good neighbors and good partnership.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely echo what Giftie says. She hit it, a lot of great points. And I put something there in the chat. I said, to be a good neighbor, first and foremost, you have to observe. You come into a community, say you just move in. Even before you move in, you're already checking out the neighborhood. What kind of place is this? Who lives here, right? Is this a place I want to be in, right? You have to be observant. You listen. What are people saying about the neighborhood? How long have you lived here? Why are people moving out, right? You have to be ready to listen to what people are saying and understand what the needs are, benefits or disadvantages of your new neighborhood. Then you have to be willing to partner. And partnership can look a lot of different ways, but you can't just go in and say, oh my gosh, this neighborhood, like I live in Philadelphia currently, and there's all these little small blocks, and they have block captains. And I'm like, what are block captains, right? And so if I had there's people who've moved in because of gentrification and all these changes. They move in and they're like, oh my gosh, this block needs this and they need this, and look at this. Well, you haven't even taken the time to listen and understand and figure out who's already doing what, and how do you now combine efforts so you can have a better impact instead of assuming something is not being done and you're just moving alone. So you have to be willing to partner. And then I would say the most important thing to being a good neighbor, especially if you're a larger NGO, is be ready and willing to pivot. Because most of the time, people are coming into the community, organizations are coming into a community with an idea already in mind of what they want to do. So maybe they've gotten funding. We're ready to go into Malawi. We're going to take this medical facility into, I don't know, whatever it is that has brought them to that neighborhood or that area. Now they're ready to implement that. But if you have listened and you have observed and you are understanding what needs are, you have to be ready to pivot from your intent and idea. And that's what really makes a good neighbor.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and it's an interesting, because most of the time when an international NGO expands to a new community, it's local, it's nationals that are leading the way. So I have friends in, let's say, I'll pick on World Relief for a moment, World Relief Malawi, who, if they want to expand into a certain part, they feel like, well, we're Malawians, we should be welcome there, but I would always be curious to know, how much do international NGOs find out if we have a water project and there's already a local water organization? Do we not go in and do that work so that we're not duplicating and stepping on top of the local organization? Or how can we just redirect our resources to help the local water organization scale or do more of that? Do you ever get invitations from international NGOs to collaborate in those kinds of ways? I mean, one of our questions today was how the large NGOs have positively or negatively affected your work. So I'd love to hear some tangible examples.
Yeah, I have one. Giftie, do you have one already in mind?
Yeah, but I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah, so we have, we actually had a dilemma a couple of years ago where there was this other more resourced organization, I won't name it, but they came into the community and they provide porridge to schools, okay? So we have a school breakfast program, as you saw in the video, but our school breakfast program is based on the community's farming, they've dedicated land, they farm that land, they voluntarily cultivate this land together, they harvest the corn together, they volunteer in the kitchen and they cook the breakfast together. We only pay as an organization, we only pay for things they can't do themselves. We pay for like utensils and these big rock stoves, whatever. But it costs us like $10 per student per whole school year because of this approach. So this other organization came into the community and they provide the flour for the porridge. So the community doesn't have to grow anything. They'll just give the porridge, right? And so the community said, well, why wouldn't we? Now they are in a dilemma. Pamoza makes us grow our own. This organization will give us this porridge. Why wouldn't I just get the porridge that's given to me? And we had to have some conversations with the community. Look, you can choose, but let me tell you, what happens when this entity can no longer provide the flour? Right now, the way you're doing it, if Pamoza goes away, to Giftie's point, success is no longer being needed. Pamoza is always needed if, you know, for you to have school breakfast for your students, then we haven't really affected change. What happens if Pamoza goes away? Well, you know how to grow your own food. You have your volunteer communities, your school breakfast communities. You're still going to provide for your students. What happens when this other organization goes away? You no longer have your main ingredient. But you can choose. We had to be able to say, we can't force the way to develop, but we can present a more sustainable approach, and hopefully they will choose that, although it means more work for them. Guys,
did you approach the porridge organization?
What about it?
Did you approach the porridge organization?
We did, actually.
Okay.
Yes, we did. We had a conversation with them, and they actually said to us, and we were working with the local Malawian heads of this. They say to us, well, the way you're doing it actually seems to be the better way. So perhaps we should find another, you know, community to target. So they understood, and they actually thought it was good, but the community has to choose. And some communities said, we would rather get the porridge. We would rather get the flour.
You and I, when we had dinner a couple of weeks ago, we talked about a very simple example and one that I'd never thought of. So when both of your organizations try to convene even a gathering, even a training, you don't necessarily provide petrol refund costs or necessarily provide big elaborate lunches. Whereas when one of the organizations comes from the city out to the rural area, you know, share a little bit, Temwa, a little bit more about what you were sharing there. Just the simple things that we take it for granted because it's such small dollar amounts.
Well, and it goes to what Giftie said about one of the aspects of being a good neighbor is you don't want to introduce something that cannot be sustained locally, but by those left behind. So these allowances and these expectations of getting paid to attend a meeting, we can't sustain that. I want you to partner with us as a community member because this benefits your community. It's better for me when you volunteer because I don't want to pay hundreds of people to be part of this program that's benefiting your community. We, for a long time, were sustained by volunteers, but now they actually see, oh, Pamoza International. We almost feel we regret naming ourselves Pamoza International because any organization that has international in it, they have money. Now they're starting to ask to get paid for things that they would volunteer and for meetings that they just attended for free because other organizations, they give allowances. They give all these other things. They will pay for you to travel here and there. They will give the program's manager or director their own vehicle. We can't afford that, nor do we want to.
Yeah. That's the thing. Is it? It's a question of good development. You know, and it's funny because I think about how many of our organizations use the phrase we work to meet the community's felt needs. But how do you genuinely know if it's a felt need if you're paying for participation? If you're paying for people to come to your gathering, if you're paying for people, like you said, the way you do it with volunteers is, the people show up, they're there because they absolutely see the value of participating with you in solving their own solutions. And they're not getting anything in return except, the benefit of coming together as a community to work together. So,
yeah. So I'll pass it off to Giftie, but I will honestly say it's been really difficult now to continue our volunteer approach. And when we started, we had so many volunteers, but now I'll be honest, people are starting to expect to be compensated because they see other organizations compensate. So
that's a shame.
What we're gonna do.
That's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, it's as heartbreaking as it can be, it's the reality, many local organizations are facing on ground. A very typical example, and I won't name names. I remember when one of the big, global organizations came into the community, they've had a replication of this program in different parts of the world, right? In developing countries in different parts of the world. And this time it was to be Nigeria's time, and mainly, down to our region. And it was mainly, Barbara, you talked about including the boys. So it was also another program that was going to be inclusive of everybody. And, they just needed 3 members of a team from each organization. And because our organization was the only organization in the rural community that we are in, it was just easier for them to, engage us. So they needed to take 3 of our team members to the bigger city. They were going to cover flights, they were going to cover hotel accommodations, and the stipend they were going to give each team member is more than the salary we pay them. This is for 4 days, right? It was more than the salary we pay them in a month. Mind you, we also provide housing for our staff members because we had to bring most of them from the city who were also locals. And you have to think of so many other benefits.
Yeah.
So by the time I add housing to each employee's salary at the end of the month, it was still more. And this was just for the training of trainers. For the main program itself to run, it was just for 6 weeks. For the main program itself to run, they were not going to provide snacks. You're bringing school kids. You can almost imagine how emotional I am talking about this, because I cringed. I cringed because the first question I asked, are we doing this for the book, or we are doing this because we are thinking of raising the next generation of leaders? They were not going to provide snacks for children who were going to come back from school to attend a program by 3. So these children have been in school since 8 a.m. in the morning, and school closes at 2:30. And these children were going to walk back from school to where the program point is going to be.
Yeah.
And you are not going to provide snacks because we do not have money to cover snacks after paying.
Yeah.
So and there was just no way we could tell our employees to donate the money back, because as the leader, you are going to have all the bad names, you would. So I had to, call our team members to say, let's tell ourselves the truth. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of these children and their parents. What is the most helpful thing? Because for us as an organization, we got funding, and we are not going to get funding from a different organization to cover a different thing, to now channel it to snacks for a different program that is running. And because we did not include the organizations in our planning, we now want them to now provide snacks. So
yeah, no, I hear your frustration and you know the painting of the dilemma. One colleague of mine, when she knew we were having this conversation, she works for an international NGO. She said part of their challenge from their side is that some of these provisions are expectations of the money that they get from large aid agencies. So the UK aid agencies, the European aid agencies, USAID. When they give the grant, you know, it's built in that there are these certain expectations that the organization must provide to the community for petrol reimbursement, you know, so I think even the conversation and advice on how local organizations can help larger organizations educate and advocate with aid agencies to perhaps change their expectation standards, because we are creating the system that we already know is flawed, is broken. You know, the international aid system needs changing, but it needs to hear from the voices of local organizations and people on the ground on how to change it, because it's very hard for the system itself to change itself, if that makes sense. When you're in the system, when you're the fish in the water, you can't even say how hot or cold the water is. You've been swimming around in it so long, you know, but you from an outside perspective can see, you know, don't y'all recognize you're swimming in hot water, you know, or you're creating miserable circumstances for us on the ground.
Yeah, Beth, and I would say, and sometimes organizations and countries, governments, Malawi, for example, will get a lot of money for particular needs, and they have to spend it down quickly or by a certain time. And so sometimes they'll say, well, what's the quickest way to spend this down? And sometimes that quicker way is not necessarily the best development decision. Right. And so there's this discrepancy. And if you're working on partnerships throughout the year, when money comes available, then you can say, oh, we know this organization, Pamoza, or Giftie, what is it? What's your organization name again?
Girls Leading Africa.
Girls Leading Africa, right? GLA. You know, we know these organizations and they're already doing this work. So now we can make sure that this money goes and gets where people can be most impacted, versus it just gets spent down on food or allowances, which is not exactly moving the, you know, lever on real change. And that means you have to be having conversations throughout the year and already have partnerships in mind and in store. It's really a challenge.
So here's two positive things that I'm seeing in the broader landscape. Number one, a rise in national voices. Africa Leading Africa, if you may allow me to borrow your organization's name, you know, but a push out, you know, we don't really need external voices. We want to tackle our problems ourselves. So there's a strong voice for that in South Africa. Yay. And I'm seeing this in other parts of the world where people are saying, you know what, let's stop looking to the international aid system for what we need. Let's starting our own organizations within countries, some more localized activity. So that's good because it's coming from the grassroots up. But I'm also seeing USAID just hosted some event about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we saw snippets of it online about centering local organization voices in global development. And so now might be a good time to be getting on those, you know, conversations, to be able to change policy, to be able to start to, you know, spread the conversation and these points that you're raising here. I think we need something akin to a set of principles that NGOs adopt that talk about how they center local organizations, local voices, where it doesn't look like a corporate takeover. You know, we've come in with our standard housing model. You're a local housing organization, and as long as you implement our model, you know, we will fund that. And that, you know, can sometimes be the way, but rather looking at, you know, what it means is for international NGOs, they're pushed so much for efficiency. That's why they create the standard model. It's replicable. We can replicate it in a lot of places with some, you know, local cultural nuance and adjustment. But yeah, to be able to go back to these large foundations and aid organizations and say, for your $1, we're able to vaccinate 160 people in an hour, you know, and so it's high volume, and somewhere we've got to find a way to meet in the middle so that these large agencies are being good neighbors and good citizens in the communities where they work. Because you said it perfectly, Giftie, that, you know, what's going to be left when they're gone. So if you look at somebody like me who's been around this this sector for 25 years, I remember, and some of you on this call might remember the 90s, and the mantra was for most international NGOs, we're here to work ourselves out of a job. Somewhere in the 2000s, I think, when we started to see even a greater proliferation of NGOs, it stopped being that idea of we're here to serve for a short time, do it in a sustainable way like Pamoza is doing, and then leave when we're not needed. We lost that messaging somewhere along the way, so that it now seems like we're here and we're here to stay and here to be, you know, your neighbor. And so we want to just help organizations be the best neighbors that they can be. Thank you, Shana, thank you for posting that in the chat. So the new humanitarian quote about international organizations should be looking to partner with and invest in women-led local NGOs. Yay. Who have found ways to continue to operate. Yeah. One of the questions was, and it was more about the gender work that we've been, you know, that the Alliance is usually focused on. I wanted this topic to focus on women-led NGOs, your local NGOs, and the conversations that are happening in the broader sector around localization. But Barbara raised a good question about that we need to be able to expose men and boys in the communities to different ideologies about what masculinity looks like and what it means to be a man. And power. We need to talk more about power, because while many of us will hide behind our ideological positions on things, we tend to always hide behind the ideological position that supports us to be able to maintain status quo. And so while some may say, I am absolutely dyed in the wool on this idea of patriarchy, when you start to break it down and ask questions, the theological arguments start to fall apart. And so I tend to find and believe that it's more issues of power and identity. If I'm not the powerful one in the relationship, what am I? You know, and that's a missed message that the world has given to men and boys. I have great empathy for the fact that they've been given a message that is not aligned with the message that God has for them. They are created in his image to model Jesus, the one who welcomed women into his ministry constantly, and treated them as equals, and one's also created in God's image. So I'll give a shout out, which I often do. Tear Fund UK had created and has piloted and is now using regularly with great results a curriculum called Transforming Masculinities. And it's meant for local community, local church use, and it's open source material. So when you go to Tear Fund UK website, you can actually download the workbooks that pastors use and that local groups use, and men and boys are really being positively impacted, not demasculating or demeaning, but helping them understand their true identity in Christ as one equals to women and girls in the community. So let me see. How are we doing for time? I'm going to ask this one question, but then also if anybody would like to come off mute and ask a question of our group, feel free to do that. So one of the things that we had talked about was this issue of power. And so there is an obvious power differential between an international NGO and its local offices in your various countries, as well as your local organization. So there's a power differential there, mostly because of money, and it's usually Western money. Not always, but a lot of the time. And so how have you been able to find your voice when working with these larger organizations? Find your voice and your power in that conversation. So Temwa, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so thank you. I just saw a note there. So I think one of the things that we've been able to use is just to show the effectiveness of the approach. Yeah. Because a lot of organizations have more money. The bigger organizations have more money. Yeah. But we're able to have more impact with less money.
Yes. Yeah.
And one of the reasons we're able to have more impact with less money is because of the approach.
Yeah.
And so I think when we're negotiating with to partner with organizations, just because you put more money into something doesn't mean you're going to reap better results.
Yeah.
And it depends on what kind of result you're looking for. So for us, we focus on capacity building and sustainability, which means we are engaging a lot more people, but it doesn't mean we're paying all of them to be engaged. So I think finding our voice, the biggest voice, I get my voice from knowing that this stuff works. It works and it's sustainable. And when we do it the right way, we go further, right? And the right way is Pamoza, together with people, not on your own with your own ideas. It's together. So that's where we find our power, is in the impact.
Good. How about you, Giftie?
Not far from what Temwa has said. Finding our voice has been mainly from the stories or from the impact, people in the community have had to say, especially the fathers. As many of us know, in communities, in very patriarchal communities like that, if the men do not actually give, a thumbs to whatever it is you're doing, you're almost working on your own and sweating all by yourself. So just getting that feedback from the men in the community actually gives us a stronger voice within the community. But when I think of us finding our voices in terms of working with local partners, one of the things we really have been able to do is engaging them beyond the funding that they give. So for example, just finding one person within, I personally do that, especially with the person I'm having conversations with on the other side, and inviting them to be volunteers in the program. So that way, outside of Giftie, we need this and this and this and this, when we are not in the room, when the bigger, brothers and sisters are making the decision, the person who has had to volunteer with us, whether it's even through something as little as, could you please edit this communication for us? Or could you look at this video? Or could you, help us put this picture or a collage of this with, whoever is your communications person on the other end? It allows them to advocate for us when we are not in the room. And we've been able to do that for most of the organizations or the big brothers and big sisters that we have worked with in the past. Because, I mean, if there is anything I've learned over the years, when you are not in the room, how people advocate for you makes more sense. The Nigerian that I am knows that when politicians want to make decisions, they make decisions in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping. So when the bigger brothers and sisters are making decisions when we are probably sleeping, who speaks louder and do they speak positively or negatively about us? So our voices come stronger when we invite them into being part of the program. And it could be something as very simple as anything you can think of. Communication. Could you edit this? And they're like, oh, Giftie, do you want to tell me more about this so that it would help me in doing this?
That's such a great example. And you're also drawing on a point in gender equality as well. So this whole notion of women are over-mentored and under-championed. So we all have mentors.
Exactly.
But what we need is the champion in the rooms where we aren't.
Exactly.
Speak up, and and so same concept you're talking about here is for international NGOs to make sure that they've got champions for all local organizations to be able to represent them well. Yeah, I mean, it is competing agendas in some respects. I mean, we all want the same outcomes, but each, large organization, small organization has, the goals that they want their agency to achieve. Heather, I'd love to hear from you from One Child, Clemens, maybe from World Relief. How do you all wrestle with this this issue of honoring local organizations in the places where One Child and World Relief work?
Sure. So at One Child, one thing that I really love is that we don't have cookie cutter programs. And so our values are, we have a whole systematic listening approach. And so I love what you all were saying, because before any programs are implemented, it is really getting to know the local voice. What do the locals already do? How can One Child come alongside of them and either augment or provide capacity building in some way that will benefit those programs, but also in a way that provides self-sustainability. And so, yeah, it's like there's a whole systematic listening process. And then we really uplift local design. And so we say, if it's not local, it's not real. And then, yeah. And then it's also birthed our platform. So our platform, Bridgely, has come out of this desire to say, okay, how do we consistently uplift that local voice and give them access to their supporters, to experts? How do we connect everybody together and truly empower them? Not empower people like we only empower you when you do what we say.
Yeah,
I think NGOs say that, like that's the behavior they have, but instead of what do you truly need, voice it yourself, elevate that voice, we listen to you.
Yeah,
that's it kind of in a nutshell.
Nice. That's really helpful. And I would like us to, so if you can put the Bridgely page website in the chat box, that would be helpful, because I want us to investigate that further. That's a new initiative. Clemence, are you on the call still?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hi there.
Yeah, okay. I think for World Relief, yeah, I would say we value the local community, but especially in some of the approach we use. For example, if we are to work with local churches when we work in the Christian majority. So most of our approach is the empowerment process. So it's like, I won't say that will not, it will be ignoring the local organizations. We may partner with them in the areas of strength because we can still be able to connect them with their local churches. but
Mhm.
maybe the difference will be like, what are the priorities? Where are we investing in? And some of the things will be similar, but I think, as you said, either you have been in the community before the local organization came in, or
Mhm.
maybe your models are different. So in
Mhm.
that process of raising resources, focusing on what you want to achieve, versus like engaging stakeholders, it's a bit harder. And we are kind of the organization that also goes into the community. We
Mhm.
want to have a bigger impact using less resources.
Yeah.
But the good things an organization is like, now we are focusing on how do we become intentional in working with the local organizations, and also working with the stakeholders. Of course, avoiding the duplication, but also make sure that we connect the churches, because we already believe in the theory that the church is in the community for forever. We are there to live. So the sustainability and all of that, we don't create more dependency. We don't try to do more of harm. So whatever the challenges they're facing, we face the same. But we know that the area of really mapping out, because maybe we have been in the community for a long period of time, some of the organizations are not strong enough, or maybe they don't have operating costs. So they want to partner with international organizations to support on that part, which sometimes it's so that budget is already stretched, and then the infrastructures are still in place. So you find it requires intentionality to see then who's in the community, who's making impact, and how best we can connect with them. Because at the end of the day, we aim for the development of that community. So if we are able to help the church to even recognize them, they can still be able to partner with them. The church will have resources, they'll have knowledge, and they will also still be able to, they can speak the same language. So that kind of expectation won't be there if they are all local. So that's maybe what I can say as of now.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. And again, there's, every international NGO has such different models. So there's no, one way in which even they enter a community. I recall when we worked on Accord Principles, one of the questions was, are you invited in, or do you make the approach? And, and it's different for every agency. So some believe in working through a local church if there is a church body, and some do not. So it's such varied, which makes it even more complicated, I think, for local organizations to navigate the differences of everybody that wants to have an impact in the community. So Temwa and Giftie, I'm going to give you the last word. What are you hopeful about? Say one sentence, two sentences of what you're hopeful about in this coming year.
Yeah, I am really hopeful about the power of the women that we're seeing in the community, and that it will inspire the men.
Okay, there you go.
I'm very hopeful that the men will be inspired to engage more, because we really actually have more than 70% of our participants are women, and they are on fire. And sometimes the men are a little embarrassed, I think, to seek out help or get involved. But I'm encouraged. I think the men are gonna come through and be inspired by the women that have been.
I have the same exact hope for the Alliance. This is a network of women and men. Giftie.
My hope for this year is not far away from what Temwa has said. I mean, we have two girls who are actually in their final year of high school, and we had to pay for their final examination because their daddies wouldn't do that. So my greatest, hope and dream every night I go to bed is that they come out with good results, just to affirm that, this is worth it. And of course, just getting the buy-in of a new generation of young men who
Yeah.
who would not be, you know, traditional and amplifying the very
Yeah.
rigid gender norms in the community.
Yeah. There's so many things we could continue to talk about when it comes to local organizations, local communities, power structures, and all of that. But I'm so glad that we had at least a glimpse and a snapshot into the experience of local NGOs and how they are wanting to help larger NGOs be better neighbors, better citizens in the community. So I thank you both for speaking up and sharing your insights and for the work that you're doing. I just pray, Lord, now just pray that God would put a blessing over Girls Leading Africa, over Pamoza, and each and every life that these organizations touch. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you so much, friends, for joining us this morning. This recording will be made available probably sometime next week. And we'll make sure that the links to the organizations and some of the links that were shared, Bridgely and others, are included in the posting that goes out so people can follow along. So thank you again for participating. This was great.